Welcome to Unedited, our fortnightly podcast where we explore the opportunities and challenges the retail industry is facing. From fashion, beauty, and homeware, I will chat to leading experts in the industry to shed light on how retailers can create a brighter future. So, following the ongoing push for greater diversity in retail and fashion, inclusive representation needs to be apparent across all categories and trends in products and advertising. In 2020, we saw more retailers such as Tommy Hilfiger and Pretty Little Thing focusing on inclusivity. And this included adding products to their assortment that support modest dressing. On the Edited platform, we tracked 10% of shops stocking hijabs, compared to just 2% in 2019. This is continuing to grow this year. So Sweaty Betty kicked off 2021 with its New Year's campaign, Respect Your Sweat, starring a mature roller skater, a hijab-wearing boxer, a model with vitiligo, and 2 athletes with disabilities. However, despite this growth, it's important to understand that modest fashion is not a trend, it's how people live. So on today's podcast, we have Ghizlan Guenez, former CEO of the Modist. Welcome to Unedited, Ghizlan. We're thrilled and very excited to have you join us. How are you and how's life in sunny and warm Dubai?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with you today, Grace. Good. Life is good considering the circumstances globally and, that we're all living a pandemic. I think good.
Yeah.
Beautiful weather. I'm fortunate to have a nice terrace. So I kind of, get out there and breathe some fresh air.
I can imagine. Don't make me too upset, but what's the temperature?
It's probably around 27 degrees, so it's perfect for the beach.
That sounds heavenly. Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid 5 degrees here today, but it's better than it has been. It's been really cold, so I'm thrilled about that. But Ghizlan, I'd love to start by hearing more about your journey. And obviously the Modist was one part of that, but why did you just decide to start it on International Women's Day back in 2017?
Sure. So the journey started with me being in the finance industry for about 14 years. And you know what that space is like. It was male dominated. You had to dress a certain way. But I've always loved fashion. And so that conservative, work appropriate attire and my love of fashion was always kind of something that made me experience what shopping for a woman who is looking for both was like. And many years later, I left the industry and decided to start a Modist to tackle precisely that problem. And so the idea was to create a destination for women who love to dress modestly and equally love fashion. And that could be, a religious woman or, an executive or a professional. It could be just a style preference for whatever reason. We were agnostic as a platform, but it was, addressing her needs and offering her style inspiration and, making her feel included in the world of fashion.
Totally. I love that as well. Like I've heard you on previous interviews as well. It wasn't that you wanted to get into fashion or you wanted to launch an e-commerce business, right? It's because you really understood the need and you empathize with that customer because you've lived it and, you are that customer.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think as well, I'm fascinated by obviously your finance background as well. And obviously the experience that's brought, because I think the more that the people that wonderful women that I speak to on this podcast, Connie Nam is an example as well, who's CEO of Astrid and Me, and she has that finance background. Just from your experience, what do you think, how did that help you get you to kind of give you the skills to where you are to be today?
Sure. So to be totally clear, actually, I was in the finance industry, but I was more in the communications, brand building, and stakeholder engagement side of things. So it was more around building partnerships and that space. But I was privy to the world of investment and finance. But more than the numbers side of it, it was the discipline of being in a space like that, which was
Yeah.
fast paced, which was around getting things done. And I was fortunate to have been in a company for that long. It was one business. I
Yeah.
started as the third employee, and I left when the company was massive across a number of continents. So I also saw vision, growth, execution, and it's these transferable skills that I would say really helped me in setting up the Modist.
I can imagine. I feel like that's such a unique perspective as well, to be there from like right at the start and the growing pains. Like that's what a lot of like, early employees talk about, and kind of those challenges, which I'm sure were so fantastic and, helpful in supporting you. So could you tell us, tell our listeners a little bit more about the business that was the Modist and the model it adopted, and also most importantly, the values that it stood for?
Sure. So, as you said, we launched on International Women's Day, and it wasn't by coincidence. It was truly a business that authentically was by women for women. And we were all about, I think women empowerment has been so overused that it sounds like a cliche, but it was truly around, you know, magnifying women's power. I truly believe that we're all powerful as women, and it's about echoing that and being the megaphone for one another. And that's what the Modist was.
Yeah.
As a business, it was an e-commerce business, an e-tailer. We were in the luxury fashion space. We launched with 75 brands at the time, and a few years later, we had around 200. The brands that you would know, like Dolce & Gabbana, Valentino, and all these, beautiful brands, curated for modesty. So when a woman, comes to our site, she doesn't have to worry about the clothes and the pieces that are not relevant to her, and she's got everything curated to her liking. And for people who are not necessarily familiar with modesty, it's a spectrum, but generally speaking, we're talking about long sleeves, long hems, covered necklines. And imagine trying to find a dress that is, not strapless or sleeveless or has lace or a slit, and you get a sense on how frustrating and time consuming the shopping experience can be.
Absolutely. And it's not like there's even necessarily e-commerce sites were built to enable the customer to filter on that either, right? There was like, just filtering by even those nuances that you've spoken to, I can imagine was challenging. So in terms of like from your experience, and this is more, I guess, about your journey as an entrepreneur, how would you empower women who also may have a business idea, and are looking at embarking on that journey, and also just like the mindset that's required to kind of be resilient and successful?
Sure. I think there's something about entrepreneurship that's been quite glamorized in the last few years. And I think I would start by saying qualify whether that's actually what you want to do, because there are so many ways to be successful in life. And
Mhm.
entrepreneurship is one journey, but it's not the only journey. And it takes a certain type of person and certain sacrifices to actually be in that space.
Mhm.
And so do you really want to be an entrepreneur? And so do you really have an idea that is solving a problem, or either whether it's a new problem or an existing one that you're solving in a different, more innovative way, or for a different geography, or whatever that may be. And then once you've clarified that in your mind, I would say what you said is spot on. Your mindset, you have to have a winning mindset of,
Mhm.
I'm going to be facing hurdles through this journey, and this is all about finding solutions and navigating that space, and
Mhm.
knowing that my outlook is one of, I will achieve what I want to achieve so long as I put my mind and the discipline and the effort into it. I would say resilience, which also you mentioned, is the name of the game. Grit and resilience. It's all about powering through and just continuing to push. In one day, you're kind of up and down, and in the journey is just so not linear. And
Yeah.
finally, I would say, and this is specifically for us women, once you've started that journey, share the wins, take up space. I think us women believe that not talking about our successes is kind of being humble. But the
Mhm.
truth is, it's, part of our bringing is around shrinking ourselves, whether it is, in terms of what we do or in terms of the physical space we take, like sit a certain way and be slimmer and all of that stuff. So I think it's so important for us to share the learnings and share the successes and the ups and all of that, so that other women get excited, because it's only by seeing models that you encourage others.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. It has been glamorized, this idea of entrepreneurship, and you see kind of like the Emily Vices of, the Glossier world and all of these amazing women. But I think it's just taking that step back and understanding the sacrifice and the pressure and, the resilience that is required to build a business and be so successful. And I know you've spoken before in previous interviews about make sure you do your due diligence and make sure you
100%.
do your planning. What would you say are like your golden rules? Like what questions would you make sure that have been answered before you kind of jump straight in?
I mean, the most important thing I would say is, what is the problem you're solving?
Yeah.
Are you really bringing a solution to the table? Like flush that out and truly understand it. I think equally important is your customer, understanding your customer in every possible way. How is their current experience? What will you add to that? How can you kind of remove any frictions from their experience? How are you going to offer them something that's relevant? If we take modesty for an example, one of the main things that I see that actually bother me every now and then is that there isn't truly an understanding of the modest customer. And you can't really, there are nuances and there are certain, just qualities and characteristics around this customer and what she's looking for. And so you truly need to understand that. And then, then you've got to build your business plan and understand your numbers and embark on the journey.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's really great advice. And I think definitely understanding the problem and the customer, like you said, like I just doing research, it was an education for me as to like what truly is modest fashion and knowing that is a spectrum. So obviously you've mentioned resilience and obviously the perseverance that's required. And it kind of goes without saying that you have faced unprecedented challenges off the back of what 2020 brought.
Sure.
So obviously you had to take the difficult decision to cease the operations of the Modist last year. So how did you deal with the perception of failure personally, but also professionally?
Yeah. Look, I mean, failure isn't fun. Let's just, put it out there. I think, there's so much conversation now around failure. And I think because of what had happened to many businesses and continues to happen, sadly.
Yeah.
But the truth is that, let's be realistic. It's actually, we wake up in the morning, we want to win and we want to succeed.
Yeah.
But the truth is that the only way you don't fail in life, in every possible aspect, whether it's relationships or professionally, is by being, bang in the middle of your comfort zone, stagnant, not moving at all. And there's no growth and no fun in that. And so for me, when it happened, of course, it was very difficult for a number of reasons, for a team that we've built, for the fact that it closed for the wrong reasons. But and for the customers and the community that we had. And the other important thing is that failure is very stigmatized in societies, some societies more than others. But I think that there are a couple of things. I think number one, failure is an event that happens to you. It's not part of your identity. We all go through it. Like if you read any person who's achieved great things, if you read their biographies, you'll see how many failures they'd gone through. That's one. I think number two, the knowledge that you've done everything that you can as a person to have tried to save a business or do your part is always something that helps. And I think I was quite open about it, and my social media is public, and there was a lot of response from our community when we closed that was quite heartwarming. So I found that being open and vulnerable about it and honest about it, because there's nothing wrong. We took a risk, we did everything we can, and this happened. And I think it's our responsibility, as whether it's entrepreneurs or women in the workplace or women in general, people in general, to share these stories, because it's so important to encourage people to take risk and to explore their potential. Otherwise, we're just crippled by fear.
Totally. I think it's so refreshing for you to hear that, right? Like, if you don't take risks, life's boring, you're not challenging yourself, you're not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and just acknowledging that not every risk you take is gonna work out, in exactly the way that you'd hoped. And it's a learning experience ultimately. And I'm sure you've learned a lot from this whole process, which
oh yeah. These MBAs, I would say.
Yes, I'm sure.
No school can teach you, of course.
100%. So I guess kind of going back to modest fashion, I know you've touched on it already, but for our listeners who maybe haven't, aren't as immersed in it, or haven't you kind of educated themselves on what that is, like, what is modest fashion, and what are the fundamentals that must be kind of covered?
Sure. So modest fashion, the name has been used probably for the last maybe 5 years or so, the labeling, but truly it's a way of life for many women. And as I said earlier, it's a spectrum, but essentially what it is women who dress in a demure way, in a more conservative, has also a bit of a negative connotation, but in a more covered up way. And I say spectrum because when you think of religious women across faiths, then there are some who are extremely stringent with their with how they want to dress and how much they want to cover. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have women who love it as a style preference. I mean, she just loves a long sleeve, whether it is because of age or whether because she finds it more elegant, whatever that reason may be. And so it's all about that lifestyle. There are so many reasons, as I mentioned, as to why women dress that way, but it's a huge market and it's completely underserved. And so if you think about it from the luxury space, in that space, modest fashion is around $44 billion. And if you think of Muslim spend, that's around $250 billion and growing. So it's quite huge and quite large as a market.
I guess it's fascinating, right? That when you say those numbers out loud, the fact that it is a community that has been so underserved. And I think, when you mentioned it as well, I think it has that kind of, everyone just immediately thinks of modest fashion as being linked to religion and kind of ethnicity and culture, when actually there is so many other reasons that women may want to dress modestly, whether that's professionally or
Correct.
for their age.
And it's interesting you say that, because you asked earlier about the values of the modist, and we had many values like inclusivity, in the sense that it was an agnostic platform, and it was all about fashion and functionality. It didn't matter what the woman, what the reason was behind her dressing modestly. We spoke about women, advancement and empowerment, but another one was breaking stereotypes. And that's specifically because modesty is very stereotyped as religious, Muslim, hijab, older women, boring. And kind of smashed all of those in how we did things in the modist, and shifting it into, cool and diverse and, quite versatile.
Totally. And I guess as well, in terms of kind of elements and attributes that are covered in kind of a modest collection, what things should people be looking out for? Is that kind of hemline length, sleeve length? What are the other nuances that I guess that maybe people may not have considered?
Sure. So in the modist, we kind of, because we were not looking at it from a religious or cultural perspective, we were more flexible, and we took a space in that spectrum that was around long sleeves, but it could be 3/4 or full sleeve. The hemlines would be maxi, but that sometimes we do a midi. The necklines are covered, but no sheer fabric in general. But where we had fun and where our customers actually absolutely loved the platform is the styling. So we would actually buy the sleeveless dress, but we would style it with, a very, cool shirt underneath it, or we would, buy a skirt and style it with something underneath. And so that style inspiration was something that was quite attractive for our community and customers.
Yeah, I think seeing that kind of aspirational imagery and lifestyle imagery, and they could see themselves in it, and beautifully curated. As you said, it's such a time-consuming process previously. I think the other thing as well that I found really interesting is, even like the consideration of space between buttons and, how
100%.
things like that that you need to think about, or opacity of,
Totally.
fabric.
Yeah,
uh,
we had our own private label called Layer, our own brand, and this was one of the considerations: is the space between buttons, and it came from our own customers. We had, kind of a very strong community and engaged with it, and this was one of the things: is I don't want to use a safety pin anymore. Get those buttons closer. So yeah, you're right there.
Oh, and I guess, the Modist shipped to 120 different countries. But I
Mm,
think what's also really interesting is that 40% of those customers were based in America. So
right.
could you kind of talk more about the global demand of modest fashion outside of the Middle East, and that the diversity that exists?
Yeah. So, because of the diversity of the reasons as to why women dress that way, they are everywhere in the world,
Mhm.
truly everywhere. And when I tell you we've received orders from probably everywhere in the world, I wouldn't be lying.
Yeah.
The US was indeed one of our largest markets, followed by the Middle East, but that's because those are the two that we focused on. But, China is relevant, Europe, the UK was a growing market for us. So she's everywhere. And the interesting thing is that whenever I speak to any woman, or for example, when we used to speak to brands, the minute we start showing them imagery of what modesty was to the modist and the women we wanted to serve, every woman saw herself there, whether she dressed modestly every day or whether
Mhm.
it was on occasion because it was appropriate, or whatever that may be. I think once you bring fashion and styling to the equation, you break that barrier of, modesty versus not.
Totally. And I think, like, obviously we've spoken about, modesty, even though it's become kind of this macro trend in the past 5 years, and there's definitely been a spotlight that's been shone on it. Um, you know, in 2020, we saw the likes of Tommy Hilfiger, even fast fashion brands like Pretty Little Thing embracing modest fashion. We saw different hijab lines being
Yeah.
launched. Why do you think there's been a rise in modest fashion now?
Mm.
Recently?
I think there are a number of reasons. I think that definitely all the conversations that are happening around the size of the market and the attractiveness of the customer
Mhm.
is one that is opening up the eyes of brands and retailers to that space. The unfortunate thing is that most of the time they're not addressed in the right way, and I think it's so important, and I've said this before, that when you're addressing a niche
Mhm.
or a minority, it's so important to be sensitive to the nuances around how they dress, or ultimately you're kind of serving a need, so you really need to understand what that need is and how it should be served in a relevant and meaningful way. I think another reason other than the market opportunity is also um, just a conversation on social media. I mean, modest women and modest dressers existed for as long as, I mean, women existed.
Yeah.
Uh, Women dressed that way for ages and ages. But social media brought that community together. And so a woman in Australia or Indonesia is now having a conversation with, a woman in New York, and they're both female, they're both modest dressers, and they're
Mhm.
both talking, yeah, this is how we dress, exchanging style, tips, or speaking about the values of the community and sharing all of that. So I think social media has truly powered the conversation within the community and highlighted its strength.
It's really, really interesting. I guess, like as you said, it's bringing people together and connecting people, which social media, for its flaws, has also had that amazing created that opportunity for so many communities.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of, we've seen the likes of kind of DKNY, Dolce and Gabbana, Mango have created Ramadan collections.
Mm.
How would you kind of recommend brands approach such important events like Ramadan, Eid? And are there any other key events, I guess, going back to knowing that customer that should be catered to?
Mm. So I think now we're not just talking modesty. Now we're talking modesty, Middle East
Yeah.
slash Islam as well. And this is kind of, cultural, and also religious. I would say when it comes specifically to Ramadan and collections pertaining to that, I think having a real good knowledge of the customer and what they're looking for and what the latest trends are is so important. We've seen it over and over that global brands who are amazing at what they do, once they try and do a kaftan, for example, they don't really study and understand what's happening in the market, because as an example, here in the Middle East there are so many very young brands that are doing amazing things in terms of kaftans. And so sometimes the shapes and the colors that you see some brands bring to the region are a bit outdated in terms of what's been happening here. And so I would say either be in that region, as in like truly be amongst the customers and understand what the trends are, or have someone there kind of share that knowledge and then deliver something that marries that information together with the essence of your brand and the beauty of your brand, and all of that. I think that's the winning combination.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because you hear it so often when brands get it so wrong, they don't immerse themselves in that culture, that country, and truly understand. And it was when I was hearing, the CEO of Gucci and how they, had teams that were based in China, and then they were also experts on the Gucci brand. So they were able to kind of marry those two together to create products.
Totally. So important. So important.
No, definitely. And I think obviously, you hear a lot about, obviously Saudi Arabian women, and obviously that they've, recently in recent years been given the privilege to drive their own cars, and in the future they're going to be able to have the opportunity to set up their own, companies without the permission of a man. What is the impact of these societal shifts kind of on the modest fashion consumer's wants and needs for her wardrobe?
Sure. I think I want to first comment on something. I don't think driving a car is a privilege, it's a right. And I'm very happy that we are making progress in this region. And I think that things like this actually exist everywhere. They're probably magnified in our region. But we hear them even in first world countries like America. But what I would say is, of course, there is a shift that's happening. And of course, there is progress. I mean, I have to say, having been in the region and from the region, I know that there's so much that's been happening for the longest time in terms of women being productive and being scientists and political leaders and all of that for as long as, I can remember, but it is shifting. And it will have an impact, because that means that the number of women going out to work, going to concerts, going to, public events is going to increase. And it's bound to increase their need for modest dressing, because both culturally and religiously, and in terms of trend in general, modesty is a very kind of ubiquitous in the region and in Saudi Arabia. So it's going to impact its growth and attractiveness.
Definitely. And I guess in terms of the impact on its growth and attractiveness, it would be good to understand, what are the untapped, would you say, where you are today, like the untapped category opportunities for modest fashion, non-specific to activewear? Because obviously we've heard both Nike and Under Armour launching hijabs for sport, but there must be more opportunities out there that are currently still underserved.
Sure. I think it would be a little misleading to kind of club all modesty into one and imagine that there will be verticals that apply to all of them. I'm yet to come across one that applies, because it's such a diverse audience and it's huge. And so let's take, for example, if you're looking at, modesty for Jewish women who do it for religious reasons, maybe hair and wigs would be, a category that's very relevant to them. Maybe for certain Muslim women, halal beauty products is relevant to them. So I think you need to kind of go a little deeper into dissecting the market and the customer, and then understanding that it's a lifestyle. And and then from that deriving what the categories are. But there's bound to be some needs in the beauty space, hair and skincare, all of these spaces, and probably even maybe travel, food. It's a lifestyle, in terms of the constituency of customers.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right? It's like remembering it's a spectrum, it's a diverse group of individuals and needs that are required, and it's not like a broad brush stroke that you can
Correct.
apply to everybody. And I guess that leads me quite nicely when you were talking about beauty and travel and what those opportunities lead. But obviously, you've mentioned kind of Muslim spending power being estimated at like over $250 billion on clothing specifically, and this is expected to reach 373 billion by 2022. As Muslim women's purchasing power grows, are there what does, like, in your eyes, what does the future look like for modest fashion, not just specific to kind of Muslim women and who are dressing for religious reasons?
Look, I think it's only going to grow, given the how do you say, the constituencies of customers that pour into this huge pool of modest dressers. It's only going to grow, and I think that the way you think about it is that it's women who love fashion. At least a good majority of them love fashion, and so they'll be excited in the same on this. They'll be excited for the same trends that are taking place in fashion. They'll be interested in things that are lifestyle related, like, of course, we've spoken about athleisure, but whatever is happening in life in general, in terms of trend and in fashion and these spaces, is going to touch that woman somehow. And it'll be the translation of it into that modest space, where relevant, of course. So I think it's only going to grow, and we're only going to understand that customer more and more.
I mean, it's very exciting and such an exciting space, and for you to kind of be such an expert in that area. But what I would love to know is, what does your next chapter entail, Ghizlan?
I mean, I'm definitely not done with this space. It's a space that I understand. I understand the customer. I am the customer. I still see a very big gap in the space, and so I'd love to kind of see how I can speak to the customer, engage with the community, and just continue in this space, given the knowledge and the passion around it. So I would say stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Well, we cannot wait to hear, because as you said, I think the passion is what is the most obvious thing that comes across, and the passion that you have to help serve this community and these women who want to dress modestly for whatever reason that is. So we ask all of our guests this, but what is the one thing that you would love our listeners to take away from this episode?
I think I would say that if you're truly passionate about something, with discipline, with work, and with perseverance, you're bound to achieve it, despite failures, despite trials. So don't get disheartened by that, and understand that you actually go back not having lost, but actually having gained knowledge and experience, and it's a launch pad for your next thing.
Totally. Very wise words, and something that I
try to live by them.
Yes, exactly. I'll be taking that on board as I continue throughout my week and life. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you,
honestly,
Grace.
It's been so fascinating and such an interesting conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
As a listener of ours, we're here to support you throughout 2021. If you're a customer of Edited, please contact your dedicated account manager and retail strategist, and they'll do everything they can to support you. For all of our listeners, ensure you're subscribed to our insider briefing. Sign up at edited.com, where we'll be keeping you all updated on the latest news and strategies. If you've enjoyed today's conversation with Ghizlan, please make sure you subscribe to keep in the loop with future episodes. And we'd love it if you could tell your friends or family about us. And if you have any further questions, you can get in contact with us at unedited@edited.com or tweet us at edited_HQ. Thanks and bye.